We heard from Robin earlier that there's connections here made with Edinburgh College of Art and other parts of the university. The New Real is a group that is cross-school, cross-college. It sits within Edinburgh College of Art and also Edinburgh Futures Institute. And we've got really good participation from engineering, from informatics, and from STIS. Morgan is a participant. We have Julianne here. Sadly, Holly had to go back, and there's others among you who we are fully intending to work with very soon. So I really hope that this talk will galvanise those conversations and lead to some new ones too. Our research practice is a little different. My academic background, I was trained as a philosopher, but somewhere along the way I got lost and ended up in the arts and am now a design researcher. And the research we do is very cross and transdisciplinary. There's still a strong current of social science in there. The design research is often providing a key sort of scaffold to broker between disciplines. There's science in there, and there's arts disciplines, and also artists. We've developed a group and also a research theme, Experiential AI, which is based on bringing together groups of artists, scientists, ethnographers, and other disciplines to try and tackle really crunchy, challenging issues around emerging technologies, and in particular AI. I've popped this one up because it links to Benedetta's presentation earlier, one of our first collaborations with two artists, Anna Riddler and Caroline Sinders. Their concern was in the hidden labour in AI, and their method of inquiry was, as in their own practice, to build their own data sets in a very sort of handmade way and really reflect on all of the processes involved, from labelling the data to what have you, and then exposing that as art, capturing those different layers of the process and exhibiting them as visual art. One of the core concepts that have emerged that really drives this research is this hypothesis that art and tangible experiences can mediate between computer code and human comprehension to overcome the limitations of explainability and accountability in AI systems. And that focus came in large part from a thinking of how the practice of the artists we are working with can address issues in fact, in fairness, accountability, transparency, etc. And also in particular we saw some rich connections with the field of explainable AI, which is concerned with that same issue of legibility, but in a very specific, quite narrowly technical way. And we're interested in how we might broaden the remit. So it's to do with the way that art and this practice enables the character of machine reasoning and vision to be made explicit and its artifacts to be made tangible. So to think about what that means and what we might address through that practice, I'll touch on the landscape, and here I'm going to do my best to do some justice to Holly's slides, and Morgan's primed to leap in and rescue you if I take us off into uncharted territory, which I probably will. Before I go into Holly's slide, just to kind of set the scene in the broadest sense, on the one hand, this is, one of our aims is to support the creation of significant artistic works. We are interested and very concerned with the role of significant art and its place in culture. But we're also concerned with AI and emerging AI and its impact on society. So with, at a really fundamental level, the dominant form of AI today, machine learning, kicks up a number of intractable challenges which have connected already to many of the presentations we've seen already. So these algorithms tend to be inscrutable, they're not transparent, they're energy intensive, they're expensive. They can, by working with historic data, they can amplify historic inequality and injustice. And a particular issue, if you're working in the arts, certainly at a high level, they're predictable, which is some distance from what we mean by creativity. So in developing this practice, our key sort of reference points are, so fact, fairness, accountability and transparency. Explainable AI, we've had very rich interactions with that community. And then also we've looked at the current arts landscape, and there's a very rich landscape out there. Within the creative industries, AI is having many impacts, a lot of it around optimizing media production processes. It's about efficiencies. Elsewhere, artists are wanting to dazzle and create new experiences. But there's a lot of artists who are already intrinsically concerned with the ethical and complex moral challenges around AI. And we've looked at that domain, the critical AI arts field, and the way that we understand that field and characterize it is that the artists are working with AI both as tool and topic, as material and also theme. They are exploring, questioning, challenging the AI at the same time as working with it. And then for our conceptual model, and you'll hear more about this from Matt if I don't take too long, so I probably need to speed up. In the conceptual model we've developed, we've also drawn on experiential learning. And some of the really exciting work we're doing now is really thinking what experiential AI means as a domain of mainstream AI. What can that mean? Where we bring different types of experiential learning into human-machine interaction. So, onto the slides of Holly. I'll do my best here. So Holly and Morgan, this is, Holly was going to present, but working closely with Morgan here. So have looked at the literature, and one insight that's emerged very quickly is that whilst there's a growing literature on AI literacy, that literature has many gaps. One of those is around public understanding. I spoke earlier about explainable AI, as well as being quite narrow in its focus in the way that, in terms of, model interpretability and how an AI system can explain its findings. It also tends to be targeted on quite a narrow band of expert users. And one of the gaps is in addressing the public understanding. Morgan, do you want to add anything to that? You look so unawares, and you did ask me to bring you in. I feel guilty now.
I can just say about public understanding?
Well, no, just broadly, because the next slides are about the findings from the workshops. So was there anything else in terms of the gaps in the literature, or anything that you'd like to share?
I suppose the public understanding of AI and literature around that, a lot of it focuses on what the public thinks of as AI, so how do they understand the very definition of it, and then are they aware when they interact with it in their daily lives, and often that would be using social media, if you're aware that your news streams are algorithmically shaped. And I suppose the gap, or what people are trying to get at, is how do you bring about greater literacy as people are using these systems? So is there a way to build in, a lot of it focuses on explainability, or why, or transparency, greater transparency around it. So how do you design that into the system?
Yeah, thank you. And one phrase that we've been using in the project is around scaffolding literacy, scaffolding understanding, and the role that art can play in doing that. So we've had a number of phases in the research. In our earlier phases, we had some workshops with artists looking at the strategies that they used. And the kinds of strategies include showing the limits of what the system has learnt. Artists sometimes intervening to expose those limits, trying to corrupt, trying to hack. Simply presenting machine learning in a new environment to start a conversation. More specific themes about dataset politics, addressing bias in datasets. Or, as I mentioned earlier, exposing the labour behind machine learning. There's some interesting discussions around the intention of AI artists. Many are interested in the politics of AI and also demystifying AI, and yet there's a question here about the role of art. Art isn't science communication, it's not graphic design, and there's a big sort of fault line in the arts about art not being instrumentalized and having its, being there for its own sake. But on the other hand, there's many people working in the arts who are passionately engaged and want art to be an engaged practice. And an interesting thing here that we've been looking at is what's distinctive here. So what would experiential AI, as we're calling it, what would that bring, say, to the AI ethics field or this field? That experiential practice, that material practice, building systems, deploying systems, creating constellations, deploying, enacting, learning through doing, all of those practices that we get through the arts, how can that complement other practices? A number of rich concepts come out. So art as a sandpit. What does it, key for us is that question of experiential. What does that bring? And then the kind of poetry that can emerge through that process as well. I think at this stage, over to Matt.
Ooh. Somebody's breaking in.
We're haunted.
Yeah. That's experiential new battle, I guess. Not necessarily AI. Cool. So thank you, Drew. So Drew set the scene for effectively how we get to work with creative practitioners and how we deploy this sort of thinking in practice to design processes to both generate as well as evaluate works that spur on a discourse with and around AI. As part of our scoping work with the Edinburgh festivals who are partners in the project, as well as selected sort of artists and technologists, we've analyzed the landscape and we're trying to figure out, well, what are the key touch points, what are the key concerns that are emerging in the field that map against those themes, and especially, of course, now in the post-COVID times, the cultural practitioners have had a lot of challenges, have a lot of questions, some of which you might feel don't necessarily address the kind of the AI issues. They come from issues of what is an audience these days when you have this hybrid kind of strange experiences as well as fully digital ones. How do you evolve a cultural platform beyond it being a Zoom streamed lecture or a Zoom streamed performance, particularly for things that aren't visual arts? That has been particularly challenging. So we've done a lot of mapping, and the work that sort of spun out of it has sort of led to defining about 4 critical ways in which our research can kind of directly engage with the concerns of the practitioners. And these are creative AI for good. So how do you develop systems, AI systems, that actually address the ethical and the other sort of aspects? You'll see why we call this an aspect of the technological, socio-technical system. New paradigms for human-centered creative AI. So how do we actually map this with then and a user experience of the AI system, because those two things are actually quite distinct. Then the next generation intelligent experiences from an audience point of view, what is the how do you make things accessible, how do you make things actually varied, interesting, and also intelligent. And then here comes the public XAI. So how do we create literacies? How do we build scaffold literacies, as Drew said, we like to say, into experiences in order to enhance that level of understanding? Now, this maps very neatly, and I won't necessarily say which one comes first. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. We've developed some of the frameworks that were then recontextualized as they were sort of confronted with real situations and real sort of research. But there's this kind of pivotal four-dimensional framework that was sort of built within experiential AI that looks at the different levels or different sort of type of experience engagement. So we've got aspect, algorithm, effect, and apprehension, which sort of maps to things like, aspect is the sort of the framing, the socio-technical transition, for instance, in the case of this sort of post-COVID digital transition, as well as the introduction of AI into the creative industries, for instance. In terms of the algorithm, it centers more around the technological aspects of the system, and how do you create the techniques and tools and functions and satisfy the requirements of these systems, both for the artists but as well for the audiences. The affect, which is how do you create that sort of artistic, aesthetic, situated experience that leads to that recognition of various sort of new dimensions and of that experiential learning that Drew sort of outlined. And then finally the apprehension, which is the kind of the specific sort of content and ways in which we can interpret and evaluate what's actually happening. And when we say evaluate, by the mean, just to be absolutely clear, it's not about evaluating quality or putting any kind of metrics around these sort of experiences. It is about creating qualitatively a shared understanding of what socio-technical systems do, of what an experience does, of what, so trying to interpret what has actually been going on. And this is mapped on these sort of different kind of ways in which effectively engagement is developing from a kind of a visceral, present sort of experience engagement towards a more rational explanations, right? And we are, Drew and I actually just this morning looking at this picture again after we've put it in a paper that's about to be published, we've realized that there's actually, this picture does contain a lot of our previous thinking that we have not yet entirely explained, but it's basically to say that there's actually a multiple trajectories are happening when you're in any of these experiential AI systems and when an experience is sort of happening. And the interplay between the technological and aesthetic values that are sort of embedded in any of the experiences is where we think that sort of learning, that sort of generation of an understanding and addressing of the themes sort of happens. As it happens, completely by coincidence, this maps very well to something that Drew's actually been developing for a very long time through a festival organization called and an innovation agency called Future Everything, and then through a series of sort of citizen science and community engagement projects, etc. And it's loosely based on several kind of critical design process models. It's called the Open Prototyping Framework, and it's in sort of phases enabling the development of collaborative work. That's really a framework that enables the scoping, and if you go to the phases, the scoping of the work or of a project, connection of collaborators. The exploratory phases, particularly play, where there's experimentation, contestation, the slightly elusive sort of recombination, reconfiguration, we like to call it in innovation studies, of course, and then towards consolidation and production of artifacts, of works, of outputs that are then displayed, audiences engaged, various kinds of audiences engaged and interpreted. And as I said before, interpreting is not about creating or assessing value. It's about informing future research, future innovation, various kinds of dimensions depending on which stakeholders you're working with. So, instead of just talking about this stuff on a relatively conceptual level, as Drew said, this is all about sort of experiments, practice, experiences. Perhaps the longest running within the Experiential AI family is Jake L's ZZ projects. It's a whole series of projects, and they are a way to understand or to approach the understanding of how image detection is based on historically biased data sets, and how by querying the data set, because working with drag queens and kings and kind of creating, ingesting different kinds of data, you can manipulate the data sets, and you can also ensure greater diversity and variability in the way AI allegedly thinks, is one dimension of this. And of course there's other dimensions as well about sort of synthetic performances. And the last exhibited work with Jake that we've seen was launched in 2021 in March, was in fact something called the ZZ Cabaret. So it was a cabaret show, it was a ZZ show where you could actually go online and you could you had synthetically generated performers that were actually effectively stitched together from recorded images and recorded video of performers, of drag performers, doing some selection of very famous songs. It hits onto so many different things. I'll probably just mention one, because the reason why we cannot like saying you should go and check it out on zz.ai is the fact that it had to be pulled offline, because the music rights that were acquired for this online virtual performance had an expiration date, and so Jake had to pull that offline. And it's the sort of detail, detailed sort of aspect on which is sort of this new technology, with the generative AI performance actually hits a very old, very kind of established legal framework, and there's a very unexpected clash for us. And actually we're working with our colleagues in the law school potentially to try and characterize exactly what happens in these sort of situations. And just, when we think about AI and law, you start thinking about, your driverless car, who's going to kill, and all this sort of stuff. But actually, there's a lot of legal requirements and challenges, particularly when you move a little bit outside of the envelope of innovation for the sake of particular functional role that the AI has, and it becomes quite difficult to negotiate. Another one that's kind of active at the moment is the New Real Observatory. The New Real Observatory is a different approach, same methodology, different approach. So with Jake, it's about a long-term sort of commissioning strategy and curatorial strategy that's actually led by Drew to support Jake as an artist, and at the same time probe some of these emerging themes. Whereas in the New Real Observatory, which is a project funded through the Alan Turing Institute, we're actually working on developing a tool, a platform which we invite the artists to use to explore how you can merge data streams and future predictions around climate with locally curated sort of visual arts data sets that the artists produce themselves. These are either sort of, mainly actually they're photographs of various kinds of techniques, and with various kinds of dimensions that they choose to explore within their own work. This is uploaded onto the New Real Observatory platform, and is then sort of an algorithm is fine-tuned with these images, and then effectively a dimension is constructed that's being explored in conjunction with the global climate data. Now, instead of me, again, trying to explain what's going on, we'll try and see if it works. Play the video from the artists themselves explaining what they were working on.
I'm interested in the ways that color has been engineered and implemented in the cultural industries, and the new possibilities opened up by artificial intelligence. I will use the platform to generate the color through the interplay of the location, a future value for the vegetation index, and an image data set. And I'm interested in how the data stream of vegetation will decide the deviation from this abstract hue. So a color is calculated by an AI that has been trained to identify the hue that lies in between greenery and built environments. And the work follows attempts at making this tangible locally and the entanglements that arise in doing so. The overlay sprinkled with hints of humour and playfulness. My hope is that the work is able to help further understanding of AI and its digital literacy for the general public. The better understanding of AI may allow some to see how AI is already part of their daily lives and may encourage them to engage with it more actively.
I used AI to transform the body of water in the Scottish law into a lens with which to view speculative features by the photographic image. Photographic use invites bodies of water in the natural environment to become visual instruments and hands over photographic decision-making to the natural world. Tuning into the operation of the neural network, I navigate thoughts concerning the character of the algorithmically generated image as a stimulant for visual thinking. Approaching the subject of AI with a whimsical thought, I begin to imagine a future time in which analog image processing has become extinct, but the analog camera lives on in new hosts in a natural environment, such as the Scottish law. A walk becomes a site to experience the slow reaction of image surfacing from the water.
I'm interested in understanding how the machine learning model will become far more complex and deal with uncertainty and vagueness more than anything we could ever program. This capability of machine learning is vital to me in exploring its great purpose, as the rules are fuzzy and ever-changing and will often be bent or broken by the abstract of its generation. And that abstractness is somewhere that I really want to focus on this morning. I would like to utilize artificial intelligence to assist in visualizing possible scenarios of how increased rainfall due to increased temperature levels can negatively affect communities in London. It's important for me throughout this whole process to ensure that the speculative visions I generate are plausible. Machine learning is simply just a tool for me in this project, as it will help me to analyze the data that I have found in order to generate an output. And I hope to use these outputs from a machine learning model to help me tell the story. I want to be able to expose the machine learning model to this data, and I'm interested to see how the machine learning model sort of understands the data I feed it with. The model of this generation. But I think there's an opportunity to really do something interesting with it. My goal is simply to build something that can educate folks without scaring them and will allow them to contribute to a future where this doesn't happen.
Cool. So that's kind of us, because otherwise we've got some discussion slides that we can discuss some of the findings from already working with this artist. But we thought we're going to wrap up here and invite you for questions.